Welcome back to the Finding Something Real podcast, friend. Can we trust the Bible? Can we trust the reliability of the New Testament? How do we even know that Jesus is trustworthy? How do we know that we can trust him personally? We're going to be talking about that today. I'm really excited because you are listening in for season 7, where we talk with different young women who share their faith stories and allow them the space to ask tough questions about God and Christianity. And today, our content is being curated by a special young woman from the Netherlands, Dagmar. Dagmar shared some questions she gathered from some of her peers who are also skeptical of Christianity. They asked about the history of Christianity, how it came to be, how can we trust the credibility of Jesus or him personally. And if you missed our first conversation, we're going to play a short clip of Dagmar sharing some of those questions right here.
We have a lot of people here who claim to believe in God, but they don't really act on it. I think it's the same in the US, but there's a lot more people here who just say, I don't believe, I don't know what I should believe, or I believe in something, but I don't know what. And growing up, I don't really know how I got to it, but at the age of 8, I was like, yeah, Christianity is real. I want to get baptized. I want to do my communion. I want to do all of the things. And then I got to high school at the age of 11, and it just kind of all sank away as I grew up. Didn't really think about it as much anymore. Just didn't really know what to believe, I guess.
Okay, so Dagmar couldn't join us today, and I asked around for someone to stand in for her. And I do have someone here. She's sick, so she's not going to be participating too much in this conversation, but she is here. I can prove it through her voice. The reason why I love that she's here is she's a former co-host. She's also our exchange daughter from Denmark, a very dear and beloved person in our life. I get to see her this summer, which I'm really excited about. Signe from Denmark, do you want to say hi? And I promise I won't put you on the spot any other time in this conversation.
Well, hello to everybody who's listening at some point.
I'm so glad you're here, Signe, and thank you for being willing to show up even though you're sick today. And this was a last minute choice to jump on this conversation. I really appreciate it. Here to talk with us today about these topics that Dagmar brought up, and I know, Signe, that you and I have talked about too, and sometimes have even chatted about on the podcast, is someone who's been on the podcast before. He's shown up on here to talk about heavy topics. I almost made a joke about them being light topics, and you just really can't even do that. In fact, we talked about twice last year, one time about eternity, specifically hell, and the other time about mental illness, specifically suicide. Not easy topics. He's diving into the deep end here, but this guy is pretty unique and pretty special. He goes around talking to young people about why he left atheism to become a Christian. He used to think belief in God was unwarranted and irresponsible. Then, after examining the evidence for Christianity, he was faced with the fact that Jesus is who he says he is, and the Christian worldview tells the true story of reality. Ever since, Jon Noyes has been passionate about engaging the culture with honest, well-thought-out reasons why people should trust the Christian worldview. Jon brings a unique perspective to his audiences and the Stand to Reason team. He works for Stand to Reason, having more than 10 years experience in the legal field. In 2013, Jon earned a master's degree in Christian Apologetics from Biola University, graduating with honors. He is a founding pastor at Sola Deo Gloria Church. He also serves on the board of directors for Life Without Limbs and the Bible Thinker. More than any of this, Jon is the father of 4 daughters and the husband of Rihanna. They live in Ventura County, California. Welcome, Jon Noyes.
It's great to be back with you. Thanks for having me, Janelle. And it's good to see you.
Yeah.
You too.
Well, Jon, thank you for coming back here. I've really enjoyed our conversations that we've had about some pretty heavy stuff. You're still going around doing that, right? You're You're going around talking to people.
Yeah. It's actually it's incredibly busy right now. So we've been doing the Stand to Reason has these reality student apologetics conferences where we go around the country, 6 locations, and it's pretty incredible what happens there. And then in between there, I'm flying all over the place or driving all over the place, speaking on and everything from suicide to the problem of evil to the existence of God and why I'm a Christian to kind of like what we're talking about today, the reliability of the Bible. Why do we trust the Bible as being historically accurate? And can we know that Jesus is the person that he claims to be and stuff like that? It's actually a true privilege. Like I have the best life. I love my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like people are more interested in exploring these things than they used to be, that the culture is shifting that way? Or do you find that this is a universal, timeless thing that you're doing, going around and talking to people about their faith questions?
So I think it's both. One is, I think it's a universal, timeless thing that people are in pursuit of God. I mean, we know that just from studying the history of man. Every generation has big questions that they're trying to ask. And I think sometimes they're unique to that specific generation. What I'm noticing is this generation, specifically the next generation, Gen Z and millennials, but really Gen Z, the questions that they're asking, I think, are different. And I mean, they're still in pursuit of the same thing. I think we all have a yearning for significance, for purpose, for meaning. And when I say that, I mean a transcendent purpose, meaning, and significance, something that isn't just based in our job or where we live or cultural. It's transcends that. It's above all that. But they're asking, the new generation's asking really interesting questions. It's less to do with, formal arguments for the existence of God, right? The Kalam cosmological argument or anything like all these philosophical arguments or the argument for morality and things like this. They're asking much more personal. The word is escaping me that I'm trying to think of, but personal questions, deep-seated questions like, why do I matter? Why does anything matter at all? What is the purpose of life? These questions of meaning, purpose, destiny, morality, things like that are being asked in different and new ways. There's an authenticity that I see that I really love. It's also, I'm sorry, I keep babbling on and on, but I get excited because I'm excited to see. I feel like this generation that we're the next generation, and I'm going to say college down and younger, students who are in college and younger. So 22 and younger, I'll say, are they're looking for authenticity as opposed to entertainment, and I love that. They're not just wanting answers that feel good. They're not just wanting to be entertained. They actually want to know the truth. And I love that because I believe what I believe because it's true above all else. If it's not true, I don't want to believe it. So if you can show me, for example, the Christian worldview is not true, I'm open to that. And I certainly don't want to be a Christian. I'll go find something else, maybe that makes me more money or I don't know, something that I like more than what I do. Although I do love what I do, but I love it because it's true. And when I say it's true, it's not just true for me. It's not just one of many ways. I think it's actually true in an objective sense, meaning God exists. Jesus is who he says he is. And that has significance, not just for my life, not just for my family's life, but for the life of everybody I meet. So it's kind of a long answer.
No, that's great. And I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. But first, I just want to say, like, you didn't always believe that. In fact, Signe is 17 right now, I think. Am I getting your age right? Thumbs up. Yeah. And you didn't become a Christian until you were how old, Jon?
I was 26 or 27. It was about 16. I've been married 16. I 17 years ago. Actually, you know what?
Okay.
Probably, yeah, it's almost 17 years ago. Yeah, right around this time is when I started struggling with my worldview. But yeah, but my pursuit of truth has always been there. I just didn't think the Christian worldview was true, so I was an atheist, naturalist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing more about that? Because I was recently talking to someone, and I won't disclose who, but they were saying, look, I was having this conversation, and this person in my life was saying, people are religious or Christians because it makes them feel good, but they're a little less intelligent. They're not really looking at the full picture. Yeah. And I know that you used to feel that way.
Absolutely.
So I would love for you to share about what happened to you and how you went from investigating things and thinking atheism was true to thinking that it was, it was Jesus. I'd love to hear about that.
That's a great question. So if we had met 18 years ago, I would have loved for you to invite me on this podcast, and I would have come on to tell you how stupid you are, how I think that what you believe is good for you, like fantastic. If it brings you significance, if it brings you meaning, that's fantastic for you, but it is not true. I thought Christians were dumb. I thought they were lame, like they weren't fun. That's what I thought, because but I didn't grow up. I didn't grow up with really any Christians. Like, I'm really trying to rack my mind right now. Like, I'm trying to think. I honestly don't think I knew. Like, I knew people who claimed to be Catholic, but when they claimed to be Catholic, they might be Catholic. I don't know, but they went to church like twice a year. Easter and Christmas Eve, they'd go to midnight mass. But other than that, I didn't know anybody who actually took Christianity seriously. So this is how I grew up. I just grew up. I kind of grew up in a sea of atheism, so to speak, naturalism. And then that was reinforced through my education. Certainly in the public schools here in the United States, like naturalism is the predominant worldview. And then off to university, and university naturalism is the predominant worldview. And it's in university where I learned to be maybe a little bit more antagonistic towards religious folks. And then when I graduated college, I ended up working at a really great law firm. Again, no Christians, at least not outwardly. They weren't trying to share their faith with me. And when they did, I'd say, hey, I need to buy you a cup of coffee because I need to tell you how wrong you are. And the thing is Janelle, I would meet with Christians and I would bring up serious issues and they could never honestly give me an answer. It didn't seem like. It was always, I feel. And so like what you said at the onset, like what entailed in the question is, you believe because it makes you feel good. That's what I thought. Like, hey, whatever makes you feel good, whatever blows your hair back, is the saying that we have back east, whatever lights your candle, whatever, believe what works for you. Just don't force it on me, because I'm not going to believe that antiquated Bronze Age myth. We can't possibly know that Jesus is who he says he is. You can't possibly know that God exists. And so that's how I used to believe. And then what happened is, I always say my story starts as all good stories do with, I met a girl. I met my wife, Rihanna. I moved from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, California. It was my first night in L.A. My bags were still in the back of my youngest sister was living in L.A. So my bags were still in the back of her she had a Ford Explorer. So it was in the back of her Explorer. And she brought me to a work party right off the airplane, literally right off the airplane. And I'm up in this apartment and it's a work function that she was at a friend's house or apartment. And in the front door of this apartment walks the most amazing girl I've ever seen in my entire life.
Up until then, you just described like the Die Hard entry, right? Like flying, coming straight from the airport. Sorry.
Yeah.
I just got distracted.
Yeah. So yes. And so anyways, that night I met Rihanna, and then her and I started dating eventually, and then she came out as a Christian to me, and it was the same thing all over again. I was like, oh man, like I can't date a Christian. Christians, I had no. I thought they were intellectually irresponsible, and I would tell her this. I'd say things like, Rihanna, I thought that you were smart. Like you're telling me you believe in Adam and Eve. That's stupid. Like that belief is dumb. Nobody believes in that. You don't believe in evolution. Like you don't believe in common descent because that's a proven scientific fact. Like that's how I would say. And she didn't have any answers for me, but then over a series of events, what I say is I started bumping into reality. And what I mean by that is reality is the way the world really is, right? The world is a certain way. It doesn't bend and contort according to our likes, our dislikes, our personal preferences. I would love to be incredibly wealthy. It doesn't make me wealthy. I would love for the sun to shine purple. It doesn't mean it's going to change according to my desires. That's how reality is. And reality is that thing that you bump into when you don't live according to it. And some of the bumps that you bump into they hurt. You bump hard into them and they hurt. And there were a number of things that I kind of bumped into as I was exploring the world around me in a critical way, that I found out that not only could my naturalism explain, it lacked explanatory power and scope, but also Christian theism did explain them better. For example, like where did all the stuff come from? Like where did everything come from? This is a serious question. The things that exist, the computer monitor that I'm looking at, my microphone, the chair I'm sitting in, they all have explanations as to where they came from. This is a big question, holy cow question, I call it. So where did the universe come from? What caused the beginning of the universe? And it's actually, I came to find out that it's not even that complicated. It's one of two things. Either something caused the universe to begin or nothing caused the universe to come into existence. And that was a real problem for me as an atheist, because if I said something caused the beginning of the universe, then that something has to look like something specific, right? It has to have certain qualities that are true about it. So it has to be all powerful, outside of its own creation, outside of time and space. So it has to be immaterial. It has to be immensely creative. And then as you start ascribing attributes to this thing, it starts to look like something very specific. It starts to look like God. And I did not want to say God. So instead I'd say, okay, well, nothing. But then think about it. Like what comes from nothing? Nothing. Nothing comes from nothing. I mean, and then try to imagine living in a world where stuff comes from nothing, right? We couldn't do science because you'd be like looking up at the stars. I love cosmology. I love looking up into the night sky, and just my imagination goes wild. But if we were looking, say we were trying to observe something up in the heavens, right up in this night sky, and things were just like popping into it and out of existence all the time, like we couldn't know anything really. Or same thing with our bodies. Like if we were trying to diagnose a disease and things just pop into and out of existence all the time, we couldn't do it. And try living in a world like that. I mean, you'd be driving down the highway going 70 miles an hour, and all of a sudden, like a cow would just pop into existence out of nothing, and you'd hit it. Like, so these are types of examples of the things I bumped into, like where did everything come from? The existence of a moral depth to the world around me. Like I knew certain things were wrong. I knew it. Like I knew what happened in the furnaces of Auschwitz was wrong. But when I was saying that, what did I mean? Well, I meant it was wicked. It was bad. It should never have happened. It should never happen again. But how was I grounding that? Because according to my naturalism, all we are is a random quantification of molecules. We're just like, we're a bag of chemicals and nothing more. Then how am I saying anything ought to or ought not happen? Because I had no transcendent being to appeal to in order to give us a law, a moral law that transcends us. Because on naturalism, ultimately everything, and you read the naturalists, like you read the atheists, and they'll agree with me. This isn't just like some Christian guy just saying it. Like read Richard Dawkins and William Provine and Sam Harris and all of these guys. They'll all agree with me. They'll say that morals are ultimately, they're either an illusion or they're relative. And on relativism, I'm the arbiter of what's right and wrong. Well, what happens when my right and wrong interferes with your right and wrong? Who's gonna win out? Well, that's when you get might makes right. It's a dog eat dog world, and you get what you can, and you better get it now while you can. And so, but that doesn't line up with reality. I knew there were certain things that were wrong, independent of my thoughts about them. Nazi Germany is a clear example of that. Existence of moral law. Another bump, dude, oh my gosh. Like the existence of our soul, like we call it consciousness. And I think we say consciousness because we want to avoid certain spiritual implications, but it's the soul. Like, think about it, souls are real. Like the soul is that thing that you introspect. Like when you and I are thinking to ourselves, like, what is that? Like, because we're not thinking to another person, but we have a conversation in our own minds, right? And where is that conversation happening? Because it's not in space. It's not out in the physical realm. It's in the immaterial aspect of ourselves. And that immaterial aspect of ourselves is the thing that we're aware of every waking moment of every single day. Souls are real. Like, and we all know that they're real. Like, we can imagine certain things in our minds. I can close my eyes right now and I can picture, oh my gosh, I can picture a blade of grass, like a clump of grass on the ground, and it's super green. I'm picturing it right now in my mind. And so your listeners are able to do this if they close their eyes. I can actually touch that grass. I can pluck it up and I can roll it in between my fingers and I can smell it. And I can smell that fresh grass smell. And then when you start thinking about it, okay, well, where is that grass? Is it closer to my left ear or my right ear? Well, it's neither, because it doesn't exist spatially. It doesn't exist like that. It exists in an immaterial aspect. It exists in our minds, our soul. Or a song stuck in our head. My kids, oh man, that new Willy Wonka movie came out. And my kids love it. And I actually like it too. I think it's a decent movie. But there's a couple songs in that are just like, on repeat in my house. And they've gotten so annoying. There's one that he sings about having 12 silver coins in his pocket or whatever. That song is stuck in my head. Well, when we say a song is stuck in our head, what do we mean? Well, can I split open your scalp and crack open your skull and sift through your brain and get that song unstuck? No, it doesn't exist like that. It exists in the immaterial aspect of ourselves. Souls they're real, but not only are they real, I came to the knowledge as an atheist that my soul lent value to human beings. Like, what is it that makes us valuable? Like I said before, on atheism, we're just more evolved animals, really. And so people should be no more special than cockroaches. But why is it that it's acceptable, like, for example, to gas cockroaches, but we don't gas people? Like, we don't kill people like that. What makes them more special than a lower life form? Well, it's the type of soul that we have, and then I realized, and this is really the rubber meets the road for me. I realized that my soul was broken. I realized that, the morality, the bump of bad, the bump of against morality in the world. The problems weren't just out there in the world. The problem wasn't just Nazi Germany and bad people doing bad things. I realized that the problem was in here too. I realized that I wasn't nearly as good of a human being as I thought I was. I realized that there was deep brokenness inside. And what do you do with that brokenness on naturalism? At best, you cover it up by things like more education, power, money, sex, fame, whatever it might be. But that only masks the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. The only worldview that offers a solution to the deep brokenness that we have, the only worldview, is the Christian worldview. And when I started realizing these things, my world got rocked. And I was like, oh my gosh, Christianity is true. Like true in an ultimate sense. And that changed everything. It changed the way I saw the world. For me, it was like I took off my colored glasses, and then I looked at the world as it really was for the first time, and it was beautiful. And then I started realizing other things. I started looking into the resurrection of Jesus, and then I started looking at the historicity of the Bible, and then I started looking at Christian apologetics in general, and it changed my life. I ended up quitting the law firm and becoming a pastor, and then from becoming a pastor to now being a speaker with Stand to Reason. And so there are serious implications. And I'm going to end where we kind of started, where you had mentioned, Janelle, that Sometimes we think that people believe what they believe because it feels good. And I think that's right. I think some people do believe what they believe because it feels good. But not everybody does that, because I'll tell you what, like when you're confronted with who God is and who you really are, it doesn't feel good at first. Like there was an awful lot in my life that I had to reconcile. I had to bring in alignment with God. And if I'm being honest, this is just me being honest. I loved my sin. I was having an awesome time. Like I was feeling great. I was doing what I wanted, when I wanted, with whoever I wanted. I was making good money by the world standards. I was very successful. And when I met Jesus, when Jesus introduced himself to me, it did not always feel good. It still doesn't always feel good. But we don't believe anything solely based on our feelings. Could you imagine living in a world where we based our lives doing only what made us feel good? I would still be in bed. It's 11:30 in the morning right here. And I certainly wouldn't have gotten up at 5:30 to work out. And then before I wouldn't deal with my kids. That's for sure. I've got 4 daughters, guys. I got 4 girls. Like life for me is constant crying. Everybody's always crying in my house. And it's usually like me in the fetal position wondering what in the world is going on. Like, I can't believe this. Like life is hard, so the question isn't what makes you feel good or what's the easiest solution. The question is what's true? What's true? And that's what we should believe. And when we find what's true, we should align our lives to it. We should align our lives to the true story of reality, because if we don't, we're going to bump into reality. It's not going to.
One follow-up question to that, and then I want to talk to you about the Bible specifically, but amazing story. I've heard it before. You've been on the podcast before. We'll link in the show notes to some of those prior conversations. So I might have asked you this before, but do you think that you felt that way about, I'm going to follow wherever the evidence leads before? Like, was that part of your makeup before coming to Christ? Or was that something that you had to wrestle with when you were confronted with, wait a second, these things that I've been making fun of, this worldview that I've been like, there had to have been some pride issues there, right? Like you're going, wait a second, I think that Rihanna's right. I think that these people might actually know the truth here. Was there a point where you felt like, okay, I know the truth, and now there's another step, which is the surrender piece? Because it's one thing to know something's true. It's another thing to go, okay, I'm willing to surrender to it. And that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, I think you're on to something here. And for me, truth has always been like I guess I'd say it's like the highest ethic for me. It's always been. So always in the background of my worldview, or my thinking through worldview issues, has always been follow the truth where it leads. That gets it's difficult, but it gets real when all of a sudden there's a lot of consequences for your worldview. Meaning things that you don't want to be true that are true. You have a choice. You can either deny them and go la 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 la, like I'm not listening to that, or you can confront them, and that often has consequences for our life. Meaning we have to give up certain things that we might like. So there definitely, and that is where you're getting, I think, towards the pride. There is a certain amount of pride that goes into it. It's also on naturalism. On atheism, we're the masters of our own ship. Like what it ultimately is I was making myself out to be God. I was the one who was deciding right from wrong. I was the one who was deciding what was good for me. I was the one that was deciding, what I was going to do with my life. And then when you realize that, wait a second, there's something that's higher than me. There's a higher being. It's God, and God exists. Now I have to bring my life into conformity. I have to line my life up with that. It was hard. And I mean, it still is hard. I mean, every one of us struggles, and we're going to struggle until Jesus comes back, or we die and go to glory, right? I mean, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There's not one of us righteous. Not one of us is what Paul says. I mean, we are, like I said before, like we're not nearly as clever and good as we think we are. And anytime you come to that realization, it hurts. And there's a fair amount of, there's pride that has to be dealt with for sure. I'm not sure if that answers your question. I hope it does.
I think it does. You mentioned at the beginning that you want to follow wherever the truth leads. Now that you're a Christian, you go around and, your whole ability to provide for your family is wrapped up in your worldview. Has there ever been a time where you feel like, wait a second, this truth that I'm seeing out here, it does bump into the reality of what I'm sharing now? Do you ever encounter that? And have you had to wrestle with anything like that?
Yeah, sure. So I used to work at a law firm that our clients were Michael Jackson, Justin Bieber, Paris Hilton, Kim Kardashian, Kanye West, like all the celebrities. I would rub shoulders with all of these people in the context of legal issues. It was a high-powered job, paid incredibly well. It was actually a great place to work. I have a very high respect for the people I worked for and with. But I wasn't fulfilling, I feel like, the purpose that I was made for. And we're not all made for this, by the way. I mean, not everybody, Janelle, is meant to have a podcast, right? Not everybody's meant to be a public speaker or a representative for Stand to Reason. We all have different callings. We all have different talents. So I don't want to make it seem like everybody should be doing what I'm doing. That's most certainly not true. But it was clear that God could use me in another capacity. So when we chose to leave, I chose to leave that law firm for a pastoral position. We took a 30% income cut overnight, 30% gone of our income. That's a lot, but we trusted that this was the right decision, and God, he rewarded that, that we've been extremely fortunate, and God has been very kind to us in the process. But that's been Rihanna and I's story since the very beginning. And every single time when we're confronted with a difficult situation that's making us choose not right from wrong. I mean, it wouldn't have been wrong for me to stay at the law firm. It's not a matter of morality, but just choose, okay, what do we do, God? There's a difficult situation. And when we choose to be faithful to God, we find that God has rewarded that more than we could ever express. Does it mean we have more money? No. Does it mean that we have more fame or prestige? No, not necessarily. But I'm not looking for those things. I'm living life according to an audience of one. It's the way I say it. My goal in this life is in the next to hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's what I want to hear. That's what I want Jesus to say to me. Well done, good and faithful servant. And so every decision that I make, I try to line it with that. But there's been costs, certainly, but it's all worth it. Every step of the way, it's worth it.
Yeah. Well, great segue. You've given up a lot to follow this Jesus. Maybe you used to think was a mythical character. I don't know. When you were an atheist, what did you think about Jesus and the Bible, and what do you think of it now?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't have denied the existence of Jesus. I would have said that he was a historical figure that lived around the first century. And maybe it depends how I was feeling. If I wanted to be, controversial and kind of not a very nice person in my conversation, if I wanted to be kind of a jerk, I would have said that he was a false prophet and deserved to die. That's what I would have said. Sometimes just to get a rise out of people. I think in hindsight, I probably believe that he was a historical man who taught some controversial things, and as a result, he was killed. But nothing more than that. Now, I believe that Jesus is who he says he is. Jesus is the Son of God. He's the second person of the Trinity. That he is part of the Godhead, the Christian Godhead, and he's the Lord and my Lord and Savior. Meaning, he offered me a rescue that I desperately needed. And then that's who he continues to be. Why do I believe that? Well, I think I came to understand that the Bible, which is, I used to believe the Bible was just a myth book. I had maybe some historical truth, but certainly not all of it. Certainly not any of the supernatural stuff, because I was a naturalist, so I believe everything that exists was the product of a purely physical process. I had no room for supernatural things. So I denied every miracle, all that stuff, and certainly the resurrection. And now I've come to view the Bible as I think what it is. It's a compilation of 66 books that span thousands of years, written by dozens of people who vary in background from kings all the way down to shepherds, in the lowliest of society. And it crosses over a number of different genres. There's poetry, there's apocryphal literature, meaning it tells the future. And then most importantly, in the context of our conversation, is I came to view the Gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is what they are. They're historically reliable documents. They're I'd say the closest thing that we have to biographies of Jesus and Jesus' life, written by contemporaries of Jesus. And that's really where everything starts, with historical reliability. What do we say the Gospels are? And can they be trusted, right? Is it true? Has it changed? And is it corroborated? The questions that I asked.
So if somebody said, wasn't the New Testament created by a group of powerful, controlling men who got together a few hundred years after Jesus died and said, how do we put all this together and bundle it up? And we'll create a council and we'll send it out to the world. How do you respond to that objection? Because it's something that I'm sure people have heard.
Okay. So first, I'll answer the objection, but first, if I'm talking to somebody that brings that up, I'm going to ask them to explain what they mean. I'm going to say, well, how have you come to the conclusions that you have? Give me evidence. Because I think as Christians, what happens is people come to us with these like objections. It's really fairy tales. I mean, this is, and they don't know why they're saying what they're saying, because what they're doing is and Christians do this too, by the way. Like we parrot things, like we just say, we have taglines that we like to say, and we don't actually understand why we're saying it or have any evidence for it. So I'm going to ask the person that's asking the question, well, what evidence do you have? Oh, well, the Council of Nicaea, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to say, okay, well, that doesn't line up with history, right? The Council of Nicaea wasn't about the canon of Scripture. It was about the deity of Christ. Let's look at what the writings that came out of Nicaea. And then I'll maybe give them a little bit of, did you know by the mid 300s, we have complete New Testaments, right? We have Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Vaticanus. Like these things are ancient documents that we have dated to the mid 300s, early 300s. I think Codex Vaticanus is like 323, in that range, that are complete New Testaments, all 27 of the books. And further, did you know that when we compare what's in those from what is that? Almost 2,000 years ago, right? It's 15, 16, 1,700 years ago. So it's 1,700 years old. When we compare it to what we have in our New Testament today that we read every day, I've got New Testaments right there on my shelf. It lines up with 99.3% accuracy. And that number is conservative. Most people would say 99.8, but I'm just being generous. That's how I'd answer it. Which is actually a point. I think Christians in general, we could be better about knowing Christian history so that we can answer some of these questions. And it's only a little bit of knowledge that we need.
Would that 0.3% include the parts of the Bible that say, like when you open up the New Testament and you read about the woman caught in adultery, and it says the earliest manuscripts don't include this?
Yeah.
What's up with that? And I'm asking that, as an advocate for Skeptic, but I'm also asking it as an advocate for people in Bible study, I was in a Bible study the other day. We were talking about objections to the Bible. And I mentioned how the Bible tells on itself. It says, like there's this part in scripture. And all the ladies that were in that Bible study, not one of them knew what I was talking about.
Yes.
And I kind of felt like I was like messing with their faith a little bit. And then I came home thinking, oh no.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
because they've heard that preached.
So it's really funny because it comes back to truth. If it's not true, I don't want to believe it. So that means there's something in the Bible that isn't supposed to be there, we should want to know that. Like, we shouldn't be afraid of that. We shouldn't be afraid of it. And this is like, I think when people are confronted with the fact that there are passages in the New Testament that we read that are not supposed to be there. But keep in mind, like the woman caught in adultery or the long ending of Mark, right? But keep in mind, the very fact that we know they aren't supposed to be there entails we know what should be there. That means we know what's in the original. So it's a good thing that we find these things out. And keep in mind, the reason why these notes, like this stuff is so much fun to me. Like I do tell you, like it's really cool stuff. Keep in mind, there's a couple things. First is when we do this type of history, like this is called doing history, it's textual criticism. This isn't special Bible rules. Like we're just going to apply this kind of science to science of textual criticism to the Bible. No, this is how we find out what all ancients wrote, like including people like Shakespeare. Did you guys know that? Did you know that we don't have one copy? Look it up. We don't have one copy from the original Shakespeare. Not one. But yet we know that he wrote Hamlet, and we know that the words in Hamlet are what Shakespeare wrote. We can trust that. Why? Well, we apply certain techniques on top of that. Are there copies of Hamlet that include lines that weren't in the original? I haven't looked into it, but it wouldn't surprise me. But then what we do is we get all the copies and we line them up to each other and we see how well they match up. And so the first key fundamental thing that we want when we're doing history, or like when we're doing textual criticism, is we want a lot of copies. We want a lot of copies of manuscripts, are what they're called. So we want a lot of copies of copies of copies of copies. Well, when we compare the amount of copies of the New Testament to other works of history, like Herodotus' histories or anything written by Lucian or Tacitus, these things that we get all of our ancient Greek history or the ancient Roman civilization history, where we learn about Caesar and these things. When you compare the evidence, the number of manuscripts that we have, the New Testament versus these other things, the New Testament has, multiple times more. We have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of copies and of manuscripts and partial copies of manuscripts, and then so we want a lot of them. We have a ton of them because when you can compare across each other, the more you have, the more opportunity you have to find mistakes or outliers. We call them variants. So variants, there's a variation in the text. And so when we can combine them across each other, we can pull out those variants and we can say, oh, wait, that might not belong here. We also want early copies. We want copies of documents that date as early to the original writing as possible. And again, the New Testament, we have fragments. We have the Rylands fragment. It's a fragment of I think it's, it might be John or Luke. It's escaping right now, but it dates to 125 AD. We're talking within, not even a century of the original writing. And that's unheard of in historical standards. So we have lots of early copies too. And when you're reading like Long Ending of Mark, Woman Caught in Adultery, these things that have your little note, not in the NU text, what that's saying is that it's not in the earliest one or two manuscripts that we have, but it's in all the others. So because it's not in the earliest, we want to put that note there to say, it's not in the earliest. That means it might not be there, but it's in all the others. So we're going to leave it in because it could be there. But also keep in mind that these types of variants are really, really few. Few and far between. Most of the variants are, they're variations that don't matter. They're spelling errors. I'm awful at spelling. If there's an A and an E next to each other in a word, I guarantee you I'm going to get their order wrong. It's just the way it is. Like, I'm horrible at it. Or if there's an I and an A, like, it's just always wrong. So that's the way the vast majority, we're talking 99% of the variations that we see in the New Testament are word order. Like, instead of Jesus Christ, the person copying it says Christ Jesus. These things that have no significance on not only the meaning, but the reading, and that's certainly not any doctrine. But there are variations that do matter. I mean, we got to be honest, right? We want to say what's true, and this is where the craft, I think, of the science of textual criticism really comes in with sophisticated procedures that they help us weed out the variations. And in the New Testament, the latest thing that I read, I have a great book called, I'm looking for it on my shelf. I don't see it. It's probably upstairs, but Myths and Mistakes in New Testament Textual Criticism is the name of the book. It's a fantastic book. And in it, they kind of actually address some of the stuff that modern Christian scholars have gotten wrong. And I'm really appreciative of that. But at the end of the day, what they say is that the New Testament, the entire New Testament is made up of about 20,000 lines. Only 40 of them are in question as being, we don't think that this should really be there. It's about 400 words. And none of them affect any significant doctrine, meaning you could get rid of them and you still have orthodox, meaning historical Christianity. And so are there variances like what you brought up? Yeah, there are. But that's kind of like that's what I love about the scriptures, is we can submit them to true, real historical historical tests. And by historical standards, they're incredibly reliable. Yeah. That's a good question.
It wouldn't be an overreach to say that there's no historical documents like there are for the Bible, right? The Bible is the richest in terms of what you can look into as far as its reliability and the number of copies that are out there. It's crazy.
I mean,
what is the Iliad?
Crazy. I mean, we're talking okay. So Tacitus's Annals, right? So I'm just going to geek out for a second. And I know most of your listeners, this is what is this guy talking about? It's really cool stuff, though. So Tacitus's Annals, right? So Tacitus is largely considered to be the pinnacle of Roman historical writing. If you're reading Roman history, chances are you're reading Tacitus, right? The earliest copies that we have of Tacitus are 750 years removed from when he wrote. 750 years. That's almost 100 years. And we only have, we have fewer than 100 copies of these things, but nobody doubts what Tacitus is writing is historically reliable, because we apply the science of textual criticism on top of them, and then we come to the realization, okay, well, this lines up and this is good. Pliny's Natural Histories. Pliny was what we modeled we don't have them anymore, but encyclopedias. We have online encyclopedias now, but you actually used to have a set of encyclopedias, and they were organized a certain way and they were fantastic. Well, this is what Pliny did. He was an ancient historian, and the earliest copies of his writing we have are 400 years removed, and we have a few hundred copies of them. The gospel evidence is overwhelming by comparison to other works of history. Overwhelming, and this is stuff when you really consider it. So why are people denying what's in the New Testament? Is it because the evidence isn't there? And this is what I had to deal with. Is it because the evidence isn't there? Or is it because there's implications, right? Tacitus's writings, they have very few implications for my life. They don't. It doesn't matter. Jesus being raised from the dead, there's some implications for my life there. So maybe we're denying the historicity of the New Testament, especially the Gospels, for reasons other than its historical reliability. Maybe they're personal reasons.
Yeah, that's great. I know we're running out of time. I have a couple final questions, so I don't know if we can get through these. But so for somebody who's on the outside who, and I don't mean any judgment by this, but maybe they've only heard about the Jesus stories through TikTok or social media or through, I'm thinking of Dagmar's friends. Maybe they don't even know another Christian. And they're going, okay, how did Christianity get started then? How did it go from, this one guy who apparently rose from the dead and then these letters? What happened? What happened there?
I mean, that's fantastic. I'd say read Acts because we have a historically reliable document that testifies to the beginning of Christianity, right? So I would say you could read Luke and then move on to Acts, and it flows right into each other, right? Because what happened is I think it's actually an argument for the validity of Christianity. I mean, the sheer explosion of the Christianity as a worldview in that part of the world and the changes that had to take place in order for all this to happen, I think is nothing short of miraculous. But I mean, we can trace the historical progression, right? There was a man, Jesus, who lived, and he called to himself 12 disciples, and those are the apostles, but then others were disciples as well. Then he died and was raised again in real space-time history. Like, this is an event that actually happened. And because of that event, these people were changed so much so that they were willing to die for this for this Jesus, right? Because the stuff that he was saying, it wasn't just like ordinary stuff. It was like, there's forgiveness for our sins, and he was the Messiah, and he was the one that people have been waiting for. And this was true, certainly for the Jewish people, his Jewish audience who were waiting for him. And then all of a sudden that fulfillment happens, and these guys were changed. I mean, dramatically changed. And they went out and proclaimed what they had learned. And they gathered to themselves more believers. And then that just happened. It spiraled. And it's also, keep in mind, and I don't know if you're going to, Janelle, if this is what you're looking for, but this is what I believe too, right? You can't eliminate the supernatural component, right? I mean, this was this, and still is, a true act of God that any of us know who Jesus is. It's an act of the Holy Spirit that takes our heart of stone and turns it to a heart of flesh, right? We suppress the truth and unrighteousness, is what Paul says, until God acts on us and we respond in faith to him. So there's a supernatural component too. But I would say for people who don't know any Christians, or maybe it's a cultural Christianity, or they know very little, I'd say what you always do with this is true of any event that you want to learn about, whether it be an ancient Greek myth or Christianity. Go to the primary source material. Go read what the founders of this worldview wrote. In this case, go read the primary historical evidence, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Read Acts, and then read the other eyewitnesses. Read James and Paul. And then you can go on from there. You can read early Christian fathers, Augustine, and these guys. And then you can learn by eyewitnesses who actually experienced what it is that you want to learn about. That's what I would recommend.
Good. Okay. Couple final questions here. Yeah. Dagmar also asked about how do you actually trust Jesus? And what I'd like to ask is, how do you go, Claudia Kamakov, actually, when Signe and I had her on, she said this, how do you go from belief that to belief in? Let's say, okay, Jon, yeah, you're right. All of this is true. Jesus is who he says he is. But how do you go from that cerebral, like, okay, sure, I believe that, to actually trusting in?
Man, that's a great question. That's a hard question. I would say, so the Bible tells us to test all things, holding fast to that which is true. That's what God tells us to do. I'd say if you want to, the difference between believing in something and then believing that something, like what you're saying, right? Or trusting in something, is you put it on and you wear it. Try it out, test it. And you're going to see that it proves reliable. Look around the world and see what best explains the way the world really is. Test the New Testament. Don't just trust your internet atheists. I mean, which is what a lot of people are doing. Go and read, and don't trust the internet Christian folks too. Dig deep, do some hard work. And then, like J. Warner Wallace, what he does is he relates trusting in something to a bulletproof vest. J. Warner Wallace is a cold case homicide detective, now a Christian apologist. And he relates it to a bulletproof vest. You can believe that the bulletproof vest is going to stop a bullet, right? This is going to stop a bullet. So you wear it. But the moment that you get shot and it stops the bullet, that's when you start trusting it. because it's been tested and proven worthy of our trust. And I think it's the same thing with the Christian worldview. You put it on. You put it on, and you test it against the way the world really is. What better explains where everything came from? What about Jesus' resurrection? If this book is historically reliable and Jesus was raised from the dead, what's the best explanation for that? You know, as an atheist, this is literally what I would have said. I would have said, well, aliens came down and they beamed Jesus up. It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. But is it probable? No, there's no evidence for it. There's zero evidence for aliens. Zero. So then why am I going to believe that over something that we have a ton of evidence for? You know, so test it. It proves reliable every single time. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. All right. Final question. It's always the same. I could ask Signe if she wants to ask it.
It's not an easy question. And I don't want to be the one to deliver it.
I'll ask. All right. Jon, thank you for being here. The Finding Something Real podcast is about a journey towards restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love. All things that as Christians we believe can be found ultimately in Jesus Christ. Restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love. Which of those four things stands out to you the most in your life right now, and why?
Eternity. Eternity, because when we have a view towards the things that are promised us as Christians, it allows us to do anything, to face any challenge in life, right? These are momentary light afflictions producing in us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. Right? Paul says that the trials that we go through here in life pale in comparison to the glory that awaits. He says tribulation produces perseverance, perseverance, proven character, a hope, and a hope that does not disappoint. You notice how everything ends with a view of the future and eternity with Christ. In light of heaven, we can do anything. I can withstand any time of trial. I can go through any diagnoses. I can walk whatever walk would be before me, because I know that no matter what, I am one day going to be ruling and reigning with King Jesus forever and ever and ever. And it's in eternity where we find our identity. Every night when I tuck my girls in, it's getting more difficult for my 13-year-olds. You'll see why. I pray for them, and then I bless them. And then every night I say, do you know who you are? And they say, yes, Daddy, I'm a real life princess. And I say, why? And they say, because I'm a daughter of the true King. They know who they are. We're not just meat suits in motion. We're not just a byproduct of an evolutionary process. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. We're made in the image of God, and He's adopted us. When we are Christian, He's adopted us into His kingdom. We are rulers and reigners with King Jesus. And my view of eternity is really what spurs that on. And so I'm always looking to eternity.
It's beautiful. Signe knows this, but in the car in the morning, I always do something similar with my kids. I say, who are you? And Signe knows the answer.
They say children of God,
Children
right?
of God.
Isn't that how it goes?
Yeah. And who loves
That's who you are.
Yeah.
If you're a Christian. If you, I could go off right now. I mean, it's like God made everybody in His image, which is what gives everybody value, dignity, respect, worth, regardless. And you can't shake that stuff off of you. The image of God is stuck to you.
Yeah.
But it gets better when you're a Christian. When you're a Christian, you're not just an image bearer, which is amazing in and of itself, but you're an adopted son or daughter of the true and living God, which that'll never cease to just take my breath away.
Yeah.
And this is true, by the way. Like, it's not, these aren't just empty platitudes that we tell people. This isn't just feel good stuff. It feels good, but it's not just feel good stuff. It's true, which is so much better than any feel good stuff.
Amen. Jon Noyes, thank you so much for being here. If you want to check out more of Jon's work, just go to standtoreason.org. Is that correct? Or
That's right, yeah.
You're doing great work over there. Signe, thank you so much for standing in for Dagmar. Dagmar, I hope that this answered some of the questions that your classmates had. Take it back to them and let me know if you've got new questions. We'll be here next week. Until next time.